All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for clicking on the video. As you can see by the title, we are going to determine today which version of Mortal Kombat 2 is better, the Super Nintendo version or the Sega Genesis version. Sega Genesis version, we're going to use a 6-button controller for, and we're going to play it the way it meant to be played. Now, growing up back in the 90s, I had the pleasure of playing both Mortal Kombat 2s when they came out. Ultimately, I was a Super Nintendo guy. I played the hell out of Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo. It's actually where I spent most of my time playing Mortal Kombat 2 was on that system. However, over the last year or so, I've definitely played the Sega Genesis version more than I ever have. And I gotta be honest, they're both fantastic versions. But let's break it down. Let's break it down graphics, sound, controls, and overall fun factor. Fun factor is important. If the game is fun, you can usually do away with great graphics and sound and such. So how does this game control? And how does it control? And is that going to be enough for the Sega Genesis to take out the Super Nintendo version? So let's get right into it. We're going to do a little comparison. First, we're going to take a look at graphics, play a little bit of the Super Nintendo version and a little bit of the Genesis version, and we'll talk about the graphics for each. So that being said, let's get right into it, and let's find out once and for all which version of Mortal Kombat 2 is better, Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis. Let's take a look at graphics first. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the graphics for the Super Nintendo first. Keep your fingers on L and R, Super Nintendo.
You weak, pathetic fool. All too easy.
Had this had this awesome intro there. Secret intro, little Easter egg, but that was cool. Everybody knew that, like, right from the beginning. So let's take a quick look at the graphics. The Super Nintendo colors look good. We're just gonna jump right into it. There you have it. The layout character select screen looks just like the arcade. That's a good thing. We're gonna use Scorpion for the playthrough of this, for the clips for this review.
Round one.
Graphically, now you can see the background looks good. The players move great. There's lots of blood in this version, thank goodness. So graphically, as you can see already, now with a few little differences, you'll notice the name is not in the, the character names are not in the health bar like they were in the arcade. Is that a big deal? Not really. The game looks awesome. They have their shadows.
Finish it. Scorpion wins.
Looks pretty good, I would say.
Fatality.
All right, Sega Genesis version. Let's take a look at the graphics for this one that was developed by Probe, not Sculptured Software, which was a big deal for a lot of people, because Sculptured really put effort into making the Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate MK3. But anyways, let's take a look at the graphics for Mortal Kombat 2 and Sega Genesis. Everything looks good so far. And this one too gives you the option to do a 6-button layout. So we'll do that. And the credits in this one, I believe you get more than the Super Nintendo. There are also like secret menus and such, which, contribute to the fun factor. But let's look at the graphics. So, as you can see, not quite as many colors as the Super Nintendo. The character animations look nice though. You'll notice something missing too when you choose Scorpion, but we are looking at graphics right now.
Fight. Outstanding.
Outstanding. Scorpion wins. So graphically, doesn't look too bad. You know, the background, you know this is the Deadpool, obviously. You know, they're there. The colors are there.
Outstanding. Finish him.
There you go. All right. So graphically, how does this one hold up? Sega Genesis looks pretty good. Let's talk about it. All right, so let's talk about graphics. Super Nintendo version. That was awesome. Okay, the graphics are very, very close to the arcade, considering it's just a 16-bit system. And I say very close in the sense that, to me, it's all just kind of shrunk down. But the character animations look great. The colors are vibrant, beautiful. The backgrounds look great. So graphically, the Super Nintendo, back in the day, I'm telling you, they pushed the limits of that system for this game. Mortal Kombat 2 looked flawless on the Super Nintendo. And because of that, you know, every character was in the game, including, you know, Jade and Smoke, even Noob Saibot's in this one. So they really crammed a lot in there. Goro's lair looks fantastic. They brought it all back, and the Super Nintendo version did an excellent version graphically, as you just saw. So for graphics out of 5, we're going to give it a 5 for Super Nintendo. And to me, it was perfect. It was the most they could do for that system. So for the Super Nintendo, 5 out of 5 for graphics. Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis looks a little rough. Now, they didn't have the amount of colors that the Super Nintendo had. There's a huge difference in the amount of colors that the Sega Genesis was able to use. But you know what? I think they did pretty darn good with Mortal Kombat 2 in terms of graphics. Unfortunately, Goro's lair is not in this one. It's a different colored background, I believe, of the portal. It's just the blue version of the portal, I believe. They had to take a lot of frames of animation out for characters. You'll notice the winning pose for a lot of the characters is a lot shorter than the actual winning pose for the arcade kind of thing. And graphically, it just looks like a hot mess. But that's not to say that they're horrible. A hot mess does make it sound like it's horrible, but no, it does have a certain appeal to it. You know the characters, you know that these are the characters, and the animations of the characters are actually still pretty good. However, the Sega Genesis, I believe, could have pushed the hardware a little more for this game, whether it's the programmers of the game itself. I remember a lot of people saying that you know, because Probe took care of this instead of like sculptured software. That they could have done more graphically. And so because of that, when the Sega Genesis version came out, it didn't look as polished or as good as it could have. You know, that's the final product of the game, what you saw. So graphically, we are going to give it a 3 out of 5. Super Nintendo blows the Sega Genesis out of the water in terms of graphics. So there you have it. That was graphics. Let's take a look at or let's listen to the sound out of the two now, and let's give a review on the sound. Let's check that out. All right, now let's take a look at, well, with our ears, the sound for the Super Nintendo. Now, as you can see, as you can hear, Steve Ritchie announces the fights like he does in the arcade. Round 1, fight, still in it. The voice acting, you hear Steve Ritchie announcing. That makes a big difference. Turn it up just a hair. The music in this game sounds fantastic on the Super Nintendo. I mean, you can tell that it's the arcade. It's basically using the arcade sound effects, just kind of toned down a bit for, you know, the 16-bit capabilities. But this game sounds fantastic.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
Fatality. The voices sound great. The music sounds great. So there you have a little clip from the Super Nintendo. Everything in this version sounds great. The music, the voice, the player contact with each other, the uppercuts, the kicks, it all sounds great. Let's take a look at the Genesis now and see how that one sounds. All right, the sound on the Sega Genesis. Let's turn this up a little bit. How does it sound? Sounds twangy, sounds funky. Let's play against Melina. Definitely that distinguishable Sega Genesis sound. Kind of tiny sound effects for the hits. Not terrible though. You know what? The music actually sounds pretty darn good. Punches sound a little weak. And you can see the voice acting is pretty much done away with. They included fight, so that's a good thing. But you know what? There is a certain appeal to the music for Sega Genesis. There's always been a kind of appeal with the sound effects.
Finisher.
Overall, doesn't sound too bad though. How does it compare to the arcade? Well, let's talk about it. All right, that sounded pretty good. I gotta admit, both versions actually have a certain appeal to them. That's for sure. Let's talk about the Super Nintendo first. So the sound out of the Super Nintendo, they kept the essence of the music in it. They all sound close to the arcade version for each stage. For the sound effects, the voice is still in there. That's a huge deal. The character voices are still in there. Steve Ritchie's announcing his Shao Kahn voice sounds fantastic. The only real issue I have with the Super Nintendo sound is it does sound a little distant, I guess. It kind of sounds like you have cotton balls in your ears and you're listening through a pillow. So it's still a little faint, but you know what? You got to give it to the Super Nintendo for really pushing that hardware again. The sound effects are incredible. The music is incredible. And, you know, that being said, again, too, like, you know, Liu Kang sounds like Liu Kang. Everything's there. Everything's there. And the sound is very impressive out of the Super Nintendo. So on a scale of 5, we're going to give it a 4.5. I don't like to do 0.5s, but, you know, it's almost perfect. Aside from the that kind of distant sound effect that the Super Nintendo, that's just the way the sound always was for that system. For every game you played, it kind of sounded like you had your fingers in your ears or something while you were listening to it. But you know, crank the volume. It was near flawless. 4.5 for the Super Nintendo. Now, the Sega Genesis, the sound out of the Sega Genesis, it does have a certain appeal to it. I do like the funky, and I always say funky because Genesis music is always funky. It sounds funky to me. It's got kind of that synth pop type sound to it. It's dark. For Mortal Kombat 2, it's dark. It sounds good. Is it Mortal Kombat 2 though? There's not a lot of power behind hits. That's another big thing. All the voice acting was taken out of this one, in which they could have added it, and we know they could have because the hardware was more than capable of it with like Mortal Kombat 3, in which, you know, we'll do that one later. But they could have done more with the sound on this one. The music is funky, you know, it has a certain appeal, but it's definitely, if you heard it, I don't know if you would have even known it was Mortal Kombat 2, like if you'd never played the game or seen it before. When you compare it to the arcade, it's almost like it's in its own world, the Sega Genesis. And as for the, you know, sound effects on hitting uppercuts and all that stuff, it really sounds weak. I like it, but you know, we're gonna give it a 2.5 for sound out of 5. Like, it's right in the middle there. We know the Genesis could have done more for this. So you know what though? Is that a bad thing? It's average. It tells you the sound is average. Like, we're comparing to the arcade here. So yeah, so Super Nintendo 4.5, Genesis 2.5. Let's take a look now at the controls for these games. The Sega Genesis, you know, you use the 6-button controller, so the layout of the buttons and such is however you want it. And, you know, 6-button controller was definitely the way to go for the Sega Genesis. So, how did the Super Nintendo handle the controls for Mortal Kombat 2 this time around? Whereas Mortal Kombat 1, the controls were god-awful. For Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo, how were they? Let's check out some gameplay, and we will talk about the controls right after watching these clips. All right, how does the Super Nintendo version control?
Round 1. Fight.
Well, the controller for the Super Nintendo is fantastic. It's great. The moves all, you know, I push the button, and it responds. It responds exactly like it should. It does not play like the Sega Genesis, or sorry, like the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat 1, where there was serious latency and lag. Mortal Kombat 2, the developers knocked this one out of the park in the control department. Controls very good. Everything is the way it should be. And it's just a blast to play because of that. You know, fatalities are easy to pull off.
Scorpion wins.
Super Nintendo controls, fantastic. Let's take a look at the Genesis controls now. All right, now how does this version control? We're currently using the 6-button controller. Everything is laid out the way I want it to be. Control, push the button, reacts, just the way it should. Now, does the Sega Genesis version play like the arcade? I find it's a little bit easier than the arcade. The animation is fluid, however, and it does what I want it to do. So the controls are very, very tight on this version, especially with the 6-button controller.
Finish him.
Doing fatalities is easy. So overall, gotta say, the Sega Genesis controls are flawless. They got it right on this one. It works well, it plays well, and that's what you want. So, the controls, let's talk about it. Alright, so there you have it. Pretty much flawless for both systems. The Super Nintendo, the layout of the buttons, everything it's perfect. It works great. The 6-button controller on the Sega Genesis works flawlessly. You put the buttons where, you know, you put the inputs the way you want, and it just works. So this one was easy. We're going to give the Super Nintendo a 5 out of 5 for controls. It's perfect. It works exactly how you want it to. Fatalities are easy to pull off. The moves are easy to pull off. Everything works great. It works the way it should. The Sega Genesis, moves are easy to pull off. The inputs, there's no latency, no lag. It works flawlessly. So the Sega Genesis, easy, 5 out of 5. Both games play perfectly. So that being said, let's take one last look at the gameplay. Is this game fun to play? Does it play like the arcade? Let's take a look. Let's take one final look at a little bit of gameplay from both and determine which one is more fun, and then give our final verdict for which version of Mortal Kombat 2 is better.
Round 2.
All right, let's talk about fun factor for the Super Nintendo. Is this game fun? Well, you can see that if you've watched any of the other games, or if you know the arcade version, you can see I am using the exploits from the arcade in order to get the opponent to do what I want. That's unfortunate to some people. They say it gets, because of that, it's not as fun as it could be. The AI for the computer, reading inputs and such, was a real turnoff for a lot of people for Mortal Kombat 2. It basically ruined the game for them. But this game, you know, being what it is definitely meant to be played against other people. So does that hinder the fun factor? Well, you know what? I had so much fun with this version, and I still have fun with this version. I love the exploits, because this game kicked my ass so much when I was growing up that you know what? Once I figured out how to kind of cheese the computer, I didn't care, and I still played the hell out of it over and over again. So is this version fun? Absolutely. And if you have a couple buddies to play it with, then it's even more fun. So let's take out Katana. Let's feed the tree demons. Again, like I said, the exploits work. Duck and jump back usually gets the opponent to jump into you. That makes things a little easier. I mean, after you figure that out. There you go. And all the motions, like the inputs, are just like the arcade. They respond flawlessly. Again, that's to do with the controls, but that makes the game way more fun because you can actually control your character the way you want. So bottom line, this game is a ton of fun. I love the Super Nintendo version. There you go. Tasty snack for the tree demons.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
Let's check out the Genesis.
Fight.
All right, so overall fun factor. Oh, you see smoke in the back there, that's cool. Was this version fun on the Sega Genesis? Well, one cool thing about this is, does it have the exploits that the arcade had? It kind of does. Does it work exactly like the arcade? Not quite.
Fight.
But you know what? A lot of people didn't like the arcade for how hard it was. So the overall fun factor, well, if you're playing against other people, it's fantastic. It controls the way it should. It's fun. Playing against the computer is a little bit of a learning curve, but overall, it wasn't too hard. It was very manageable. I mean, on the other difficulty levels, it definitely gets harder.
Finish him.
Get a snack for the tree demons there. Overall, the Sega Genesis version, it plays perfectly because of the controls, and that overall makes this a very fun version. Let's quickly talk about it and then give our final verdict on the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis Mortal Kombat 2. Alright, so there you have it. Fun factor. Were these games fun? Were these versions fun? Absolutely. The Super Nintendo plays a little more like the arcade. That could have been a turnoff for people. The AI on the arcade was ridiculously difficult unless you knew the exploits, and it was unfortunate that the computer basically read your inputs and would react based on based on your inputs. They did bring that over to the Super Nintendo version, so unless you know the exploits, you are going to get your butt kicked left and right. And, that's a turnoff for some people. So, a fun factor against the arcade, or against the computer on the Super Nintendo, yeah, it all depends on, if you know the exploits of this game, and if you don't, it's going to be relentless on you, and that will definitely take from the fun factor in regards to the Super Nintendo. So that being said, the game, however, when you play against another person, another human opponent, or if you have a few buddies over, whatever it was back in the day, that was the way these games were meant to be played anyways, for the most part, and that's how you would play it. More than likely for the most part also. So aside from the computer being relentlessly difficult for the Super Nintendo, it's still very, very fun to play. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for the Super Nintendo. Now the Sega Genesis, the controls are tight. I find it's a little bit easier than the Super Nintendo. However, it does seem to still have the same computer programming. I guess it reacts in the same way that the arcade played. So unless you know those exploits, again, you're going to have a really tough time playing through this game for the Sega Genesis. So that being said, it's a game that's meant to be played with friends, and when you did on the Sega Genesis, it was flawless. You had a great time, and if you both love the game, then you're going to be playing this one for hours and hours, and it's a lot of fun. And that being said, Sega Genesis will get a 4 out of 5 on fun factor also. So there you go. We covered the four topics: controls, graphics, sound, fun factor. As you can see, the Super Nintendo scored an 18.5 out of 20. This is, in my breakdown of the game, 18.5. The Super Nintendo version was pretty damn near flawless. In comparison to the arcade. I loved it. I played the hell out of it. I still can. I play it just like I'm playing the arcade when I do play against the computer. And it runs fast, it plays smooth, and overall, it was probably it's up in my top 3 favorite games for the Super Nintendo, and it's my favorite game of all time. So there you have it. Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo, 18.5. The Sega Genesis scored slightly lower at a 14.5 out of 20, just because of the graphics and the sound. And that was just the hardware back in the day of that system. The Super Nintendo could pump out more colors than the Sega Genesis, and because of that, games looked better. There was more animation. The Sega Genesis, though, however, the programmers of Mortal Kombat 2 did not push the limits of the system. They could have done more with it, and they didn't. So unfortunately, because of that, the Sega Genesis, in my eyes, was not as good as the Super Nintendo version. But did they correct that with the Sega 32X version? Did they make it look better and sound better? And is that what we should be comparing the Super Nintendo version to? Well, we're probably going to end up doing that, just because the 32X version is better than the Sega Genesis version, in my opinion. So is it better than the Super Nintendo? Well, we'll find out in another video. But when it comes down to Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo takes the cake. And that's my final verdict, and I'm sticking with it. So let me know in the comments if you agree or you disagree. And thank you very much for checking out the video. I had fun doing this one. And we will see you again. We'll see you again soon in a video when we compare the Super Nintendo to the 32X version. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you soon in another video. Take care, everyone.